There's three main bottlenecks that lifecycle marketers face.
So Jasper, on today's episode, what do you think of our conversation with George?
I thought it was a really good conversation. I really liked his take on the bottlenecks that marketers face today, and how they can solve them. So I think, if you're thinking about using AI, I think focusing on those areas in terms of how you're going to get the best value from it. So content is obviously a huge one, and producing the right content, experimentation, figuring out who and what is the right thing to send to someone. And data, which I think is an interesting one. We all know, right? Enterprise data is messy, and being able to use modern AI tooling to make that less messy, I think is a really important take from what he said.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think each of those kind of beget the other. Where I think what Braze AI Decisioning Studio is doing on the reinforcement learning and experimentation side creates the need for more content, right? You kind of go through these bottlenecks, and the more you do in one, the greater need, or the greater it creates a bottleneck in those other areas, i.e., requiring access to more signals and more data to power experimentation, and therefore requiring more content to fill the promise of that experimentation. So all of them are kind of interrelated with each other. And I think that even though each one of those bottlenecks exists today, they compound in each other. And I think that's between what they're doing, what Jacquard's doing, and other players in the space, they all very much are complementary in that regard. So and it was great to see kind of his perspective on where he came from a kind of pure mathematics and machine learning basis, all the way into and kind of taking that approach into marketing. I thought that was great. On to our conversation with George. So welcome, George, and welcome back, Jasper. Before we get into the conversation with George, how are you doing?
Good. I've got sore legs this week.
Sore legs. Why have you got sore legs?
So I did the Surrey Three Peaks Challenge on the weekend. The peaks are probably as exciting as you can imagine being Surrey. Not particularly high.
I didn't even realize Surrey has 3 peaks.
It has 3 peaks. Yeah. Small hills, if you will. But it was 24 miles of solid walking and several pints along the way. But it was a good day out. How's
Nice.
your week been?
Week's been great. I'm heading towards George, actually. I'm heading to Texas for South by Southwest in Austin, which will be good fun. I think South by Southwest is always an interesting conference. I feel like it's supposed to be this intersection of like film and music and tech and culture. And I think between film, music, and tech, it's really just a who's who of people worried about that AI is going to take their jobs. And so it's a I don't know. We've not done South by Southwest before. I think it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of kind of partners, a lot of agencies there, and it'll be my first time, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, it's a weird one as well. It goes all the way through the weekend, so it's a kind of a bit of business and pleasure type thing. So should be good fun.
Yeah. Well,
Sounds fun.
Embarrassingly, even though I've lived most of my life in Texas, I've never been to South by Southwest.
Okay.
Oh wow,
Interesting. I feel like South by
that's like how I grew.
Sorry, go on, Jasper.
I was going to say that's like how I grew up in Australia, and I've still never seen the Great Barrier Reef.
I grew up in the
Kind of
UK, and I've seen the Great Barrier Reef. So nice. Okay. Well, yeah. I'll let you know how it is. Cool. So why don't we get stuck in? Now, I want to do something a little different this time, and start off with a bit. We normally end with a game. I'd like to start off with a bit of a game, and you guys can tell me what you think the answer to some of these questions are.
Are we going back to the games that just designed to make me look bad?
Yes.
Are we back there
pretty
again?
much. I don't think you're not supposed to know the answer to any of these
George,
questions.
you'll come out of this looking great. I'll come out of this looking quite bad. So feel good about this game.
Yeah, I don't think if you know the answer to any of these, I'll be very impressed. How many? Give me a ballpark. You can go kind of over under. How many versions of the hyperlink blue did Google A/B test before they ended up with the specific, I guess, the hex code for the blue that turned into the hyperlink?
The pre-visited color, right?
The pre-visited, it was actually for the sponsored links, I think, but I think it's just become the standard for a hyperlink. Yeah.
Are we both going?
Yeah, give
Just
me
throw
like
them.
an under and over. Give me a number, and then whoever's closest will get this one.
76.
Okay.
So I'm going to guess 10,000. And the reason for that is if you think about the things you could vary the color, you can vary the font size, you can vary like the width, and I guess you could vary the actual font. And so give or
This
take,
is
there's
just
10 in
the
each.
color.
So,
this is just
oh,
the
this
color.
is just the. Oh, this is just the color. Oh, okay.
Just the blue.
Okay,
Just
then,
the shades of blue. I should be clear. It's
okay.
shades of blue.
Then I'm going to go with 30.
30. I'm glad you changed your answer, George, because it's 41 was the answer.
Oh, yeah, we were close though. You win.
41. And apparently, it's good. It's good also because this clearly happened somewhere in like the 90s, right? And so like this isn't like this is early on in the internet. But
The fact that they were testing it at that level back then is impressive.
right, exactly. Apparently, it's generated them. Someone did some. I guess you can't quite quantify this, but 200 million in incremental ad revenue was based off that particular shade of blue. So just goes to show that you can
Now, of course, it's much easier. They just make it the same color and appearance as the non-ads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now you really want to hide them. But okay, so that's the optimization question. Let's go with one from the Jacquard data set. And so this is through me trying to reverse engineer NLU transformer model, but also look at our the collective data set that this thing's trained on. What word do you think reduces email open rates on average by 10%? There's one word that if you include it in your email subject lines or push notifications, SMS, whatever, will reduce on average your open rates by 10%. Now it could be any word, but in this one I'm thinking of one in particular that is quite counterintuitive. I'll give you a better another clue that it's mostly used in the retail space.
Offers.
Close. I thought you were going to say OfferFit then.
Yeah. Promotion
reduces it by 10%.
Yeah. I'm gonna riff off of Jasper. Yeah. Jasper, we can take turns when we can play colder, warmer.
To be honest, my first guess was going to be deals, and then I changed it to offers.
Yeah, my first guess was going to be quick call.
Yeah, no, that's a 0% open rate, especially the ones who try and email me about that. Anybody trying to get in my calendar. So the answer is free. If you use the word free, it will reduce your open rate by 10%. And I actually looked into the data on this one. It's largely used in the context of free shipping. And so that's when it's used the most, although there are lots of things like free giveaway, free gift. I kind of thought about why that's included. There's also the reason I originally found this as I was looking at how language related to the 4th of July impacts marketing campaigns. And so I was looking at words which are associated with the 4th of July. And there's things like freedom and the eagle emoji and all these different things. Anyway, so I looked at the word free, and free obviously used in many different contexts. Anyway, so it reduces engagement rates. And I think it's part of the reason is if I said I was going to give you a gift, right? It's somehow less valuable to you if I say I'm going to give you a free gift. You know what I mean? Like there's something that devalues that statement by saying it's free, right? And I think just removing the word free, we're getting it away for free. There's something about, and also free shipping is kind of table stakes. Anyway, so last question, and we can get on to the actual proper questions. There's something in linguistics called meta-analysis. It's not meta-analysis, which I originally thought it was. It's meta-analysis. What is meta-analysis in linguistics? It is something that happens to words over time.
How their meaning changes?
Close. Something else changes over time. This was fascinating to me. The way they spell them, yes, but it's actually a little bit more than that. It's to do with both a written language and spoken language.
Oh, the way you spell and pronounce them.
I'll give you an example. Orange used to be Norrange.
Oh,
What's, you know Italian, Jasper? What's orange in Italian?
Arancha.
What is it in Spanish?
I have no idea. I'm guessing it's similar to Arancha.
Well, it has an N on the beginning. It's
Naranja.
naranja, right?
Naranja. Yeah.
So there was an N at the beginning, and what happened in they believe it was either in Italian or French. When you had said like in French, un orange, which would be un orange, it would take off the N because people just thought it was on the un. In the same way that an orange became an orange and not an orange. And so it's when basically, and there's tons of words like this. Apron used to be napron.
Grimm's Law. I remember in school we covered a thing called Grimm's Law, which sounds a lot like this.
Okay, interesting. Could be could be related. But anyway, so over time, so apron originally was napron because people say an apron, and it became an apron. Same that goes with newt. It was an oot, and it became a newt. Anyway, thought that was an interesting.
It's all the ones that start. Is it everything that has "an" before it?
That's a reason for it to occur, yes, but it isn't always the case. So anyway, those are our three facts. Why don't we actually get into the business of it? Jasper, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Let's kick off the conversations. George, really lovely to meet you. Before we get into the topic of AI, because I feel like that's all we talk about at the moment, I'd love to start with your personal journey. What drew you to the problem of marketing decision making and personalization?
Yeah, so by training, I'm a mathematician, and when I was, I did undergrad, grad school, and then a PhD all in math, and I did just pure math, theoretical math. So, and then over time, most of the people that I studied with and worked with ended up going into various types of AI and machine learning. Because if you're a mathematician, you're either going to become a pure academic mathematician or like, what do you do? Well, this is like the big thing that's happening that's extremely relevant to what you've studied. And in my case, both me and there was a very good friend of mine from grad school, Victor Kostouk. He and I did our PhDs in the same department at Cornell. We both sort of started getting interested in machine learning initially through its applications to education technology, right? You can use machine learning in order to predict, student disengagement, et cetera. And so we got into it, and he actually became, quite technical and ended up specializing in that. And then eventually, Victor ended up a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, where he was using machine learning for marketing personalization. And he didn't come at it from I'm fascinated with marketing. He was fascinated with the technology, machine learning, and marketing was just a very natural application. And Victor started using a type of AI called reinforcement learning, which you can think of as a next generation way to do next best action or personalization. Instead of having these more simple machine learning models that just make predictions, right? How likely is a customer to churn? How likely are they to buy in a certain product type? With reinforcement learning, you have agents that autonomously make decisions for customers, and they learn through trial and error what performs better with what types of customers. And Victor was doing that custom for clients of BCG. And then he had a thought this really could be productized in a way to make it much more robust and accessible to companies everywhere. And he and I had always really enjoyed working together. We were very good friends. And so we teamed up, and that's how we got into it. I didn't have a marketing background previously. I got into marketing over the course of doing this, but I was just somebody who was, wanted to work with Victor and was really interested in the math behind this type of thing.
OfferFit was a huge success story, right? Founded in 2020, acquired by Braze just a few years later. What were some of the kind of pivotal moments along that journey where you realized that you're really onto something that could change the way marketers think about communicating with their customers?
I'd say probably the single most pivotal moment happened in the first few months. When we started the company, we thought it was going to be about personalizing promotions, hence the name OfferFit. Right, as fitting the offer to the customer. And then pretty soon, as we started working with our very first customers, they gave us feedback. They're like, look, guys, we don't see personalizing promotions as broad enough. We see that as the promotion is one aspect of what we do as lifecycle marketers. What we really want to do is personalize and optimize a whole collection of things. It's the messages, it's the time of day, it's the day of the week, it's the frequency, it's the channel that we use. We want to be able to personalize on all these things. And so that became the premise. We became an AI decisioning engine that you could use as long as you were making decisions at the individual customer level. And then you had some KPI back on like how successful was that decision? Like, did the customer make a purchase, conversions or clicks or anything? As long as you have that success feedback loop back and you're able to make decisions at the customer level, that's the sandbox in which we can play. And I think that was quite pivotal because that kind of really fit the mental model of marketers of like, here's a problem we have, and now we were able to like cover the full surface area of that problem.
One thing that we certainly think about at Jacquard is how we leverage AI for performance, for improving engagement, conversions, the whole funnel. A lot of AI out there right now, or AI capabilities, are seen as this kind of productivity efficiency tool, kind of either doing more with less. Or do you think that's a bit of a misnomer? Do you think that ultimately the end state of all these capabilities is, I feel like Braze AI Decisioning Studio, OfferFit, at the end of the day, it started as this performance capability and it's kind of stayed as that. Obviously, it does things that humans could never do. But also, it's not just coming across as this tool that saves you what you would have otherwise been doing. Do you think about it in that way in terms of productivity, efficiency, and performance, or is it? How should people think about it?
To me, the two kind of efficiency and performance improvement, they flow together in a certain way, right? Because the way to think about it is, if you're not using AI decisioning, then what are your options? Well, either you're just not doing nearly the amount of testing and optimization you could be doing, or you're doing it, but then it's going to be vastly more work and you're still not going to get the same results. And so in practice, it ends up being a bit of both, right? So companies usually are doing a bunch of work right now to do manual A/B tests, and that's very, very time consuming. And that also doesn't let them personalize areas as much as they'd like. And then when they deploy AI decisioning, they're both going to save some of that time, and they're also going to then start to get better performance. And then it's sort of a design decision for the company, right? That time that you saved, what do you reinvest it in? You could reinvest it in doing more of this, or you could reinvest it in, various other priorities that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've described this shift from like segment level rules to kind of this true one-to-one decisioning. But I think we see this parallel shift happening on the content side. From a marketer writing one subject line to AI generating and predicting performance across thousands of language variants. When you combine one-to-one decisioning with that kind of ability to create content at scale, what do you think that unlocks for brands that kind of neither system achieves alone?
And this, I think, goes to the heart of why, for example, our solutions are so complementary to each other. I've long thought about it as there's three main bottlenecks that lifecycle marketers face. Like, what prevents every lifecycle marketer has the same dream. It's perfect one-to-one personalization. It's a cliche, right? Almost, because it's so obvious that like that's what we all want. Send exactly the right message to each customer through the right channel at the right time with the right promo, if any, etc. There's three reasons that stand in the way collectively. One is the content bottleneck. It's like, in order to send the perfect thing to each person, well, you got to have a big library of perfect things. You either need to be generating them on the fly with LLMs, or if you're not generating them on the fly because you need to go through some kind of approval process and you want a human in the loop, you need to have a big library so you can actually have an arsenal of things to match to do that. The second bottleneck is data integration. You need to have all your data systems talking to each other because operationally, that's, from a marketing ops point of view, how do you get that whole pipeline working of like pulling customer data and making the right decisions and activating them? And so that's a bottleneck. And the third bottleneck is the experimentation bottleneck. Even if you had the world's most amazing library of all possible content and you had a beautifully integrated tech stack, how do you actually know what is the action to take for each person that's going to give your best performance? And you can have some outside in views, but it's very company specific in the end. So in the end, there's no way around. If you want to get full optimization, you're going to have to be running experiments like on your actual customers in your industry, in your business. And so that's a bottleneck though, because testing is incredibly labor intensive. Even doing a simple A/B test, not even worried about personalization and segments, just running an A/B test. You got to design it, you got to run it, you got to analyze the results, you got to get to stat sig. It's very laborious and it's very slow. And so those three bottlenecks collectively conspire to make it feel like molasses to make progress. And so with Braze AI Decisioning Studio, our primary focus, previously OfferFit, now Braze AI Decisioning Studio, our primary target is that experimentation bottleneck. It's how do you really make it way easier to learn through trial and error and not have to do this awkward segments, A/B test thing, just let the AI autonomously experiment and discover. what's the best action to take for each individual. Meanwhile, for example, something that Jacquard is really helping solve is this content bottleneck. How do you get that really rich library of all those different creatives? Because you could be making the world's best decisions, but if you have an extremely homogeneous and uninteresting library of creatives, that's not going to do you any good. You need to actually have a lot of variety and quality in your creatives, and that's a very important challenge and a very important bottleneck as well.
Do you ever think we'll reach? I completely agree with you. You go to any marketing conference, and pretty much every presentation you see is all they're talking about is personalization, right message, right time, right channel. Do you ever think we'll reach the ultimate goal? And like, what does that look like in practice? Like, do you view autonomous decision making aligned with autonomous message generation? Like, how do you think? What do you think the pathway is to that? And do you think people will ever be comfortable with letting the guardrails down?
Oh, I think we're definitely gonna get there in just a few years. Because if you look at framing in terms of these three bottlenecks, creating that very large library of high quality content is getting easier and easier as AI advances, right? So the content bottleneck, like for example, the things that y'all are doing. Data integration is another very natural application of LLMs, because LLMs are very good at doing programming, and data engineering is programming. Ultimately, integrating systems is coding. And so there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done across many companies to make it easier to integrate systems by using LLMs, but that's being worked on by many companies. And then finally, in terms of the experimentation bottleneck, that's our focus. And there as well, like technically there's nothing about it that's intractable. It's just a matter of continuing to develop and mature the products to make them more and more accessible to broader and broader audiences of companies. There's sort of the separate question of, will people be using LLMs to just send things without a human in the loop, right? Will companies have a situation where the LLM writes things and they go out? I think that's going to be a personal decision, right, for each company. I think over time, we're going to see increasing comfort with that. But I also think there's going to be some companies that are may never get there for the same reason why they have internal approval processes for if a person writes something, why that has to be reviewed by other people too before it goes out. So I think we're going to see a range of comfort. Smaller companies are going to be more comfortable with this earlier. Bigger companies are going to take longer. But the general trend, I think, is going to be towards more than.
If a brand is communicating differently to everybody, there's this kind of sense of a single brand identity that somewhat can be lost there, because you might be receiving something that very much resonates with you, Jasper might be receiving something that resonates with him, and that's something different. Is that something you think about as it relates to Braze AI decisioning, about really ensuring that there's a level of brand identity? Or do you think that there's almost an element of that brand identity that goes away over time, or that will continue to people move away from?
Yeah, this is kind of at risk of using a $10 word. It's kind of it's a question of epistemology. So there are certain things that that are very knowable and that you can know easily. And there are certain things that are very important, but they're a lot less measurable and they're a lot less knowable. So let me give you an example. If you do a very simple local optimization, which email do I send to a customer right now in order to get them to buy something immediately? That's very knowable. You can set up a test, you can measure it, and that's a fact. But there are also these very important subtle things like what you're referring to, Toby, which is like long-term brand identity. That's built over years. And you can't very, very precisely quantify and measure that and say, oh, if our messaging is this way and we do that consistently in 5 years, this will finally have a big impact on the collective perception of our company. That's just how do you measure that? You can't really measure that. You can have maybe you can measure like little bits and pieces of it. You can look at historical campaigns other companies have run, but at the end of the day, it's going to go back to judgment and some kind of judgment call. But that doesn't mean it's not important. It's also very, very important. And so a lot of how companies that are smart about this think about it, and it's the same thing with brand marketing and performance marketing, right? There used to be this big debate of like which is better, and I think now the most sophisticated marketers realize they're actually both important, and you need to balance them and integrate them really carefully. It's the same thing here. You sort of need to decide what are the things that you're going to subject to data-driven, precise optimization, because there are things that are knowable, they're kind of epistemologically highly tractable. And what are the things that are not that? What are the things that are very important and they're going to dictate the long-term success of your business, but you can't distill them, measure them precisely, and optimize them in this mathematical way. You're going to need to use your judgment. And that means you're going to have to impose some guardrails on your optimizations so that they fit your overall strategy, which is your best guess based on the information of like what's going to happen long term.
Do you think they could be at odds with each other to some extent? I could come up with a piece of content that gets someone to open an email, right? It'll probably say something like, you've won $1 million, right? And at the end of the day, you lose a lot of brand equity. You might get that open, but you might get the unsubscribe at the same time. And so when you start optimizing this kind of reinforcement loan to a certain signal, do you think it always comes at the cost of another?
It does. I think it's an excellent question. So, it's almost like mathematically, definitionally, whenever you impose any kind of constraint or guardrail, that's going to degrade performance. Because a guardrail is almost saying, hey, model, before you could do whatever you thought you needed to do to maximize this KPI, now you have less freedom to do that. And so it's impossible that any kind of guardrail isn't going to degrade your performance. So when you have these long-term strategic goals, and you're saying for the short-term local optimizations that we do, we're going to constrain them because of the long-term goals, you're going to get less performance on the short-term goals. But that's actually still correct. You're making the right decision. So kind of overall, these two things are sometimes in conflict, and that's why marketing strategy is so important, because they're both important for a business's success, and understanding when their intention and finding the right balance of when to give freedom for your optimizations versus when not to do that is really important. So depending on the particular industry you're in, as well as your overall business strategy, that's going to dictate whether it makes sense to have a lot of personalization and a lot of flexibility. In some cases, that can actually reinforce your brand, because that flexibility and that customization may be actually a core part of your brand identity and the messaging you're going out there. Versus certain cases where actually your identity is very much in the opposite direction. It's about standardization and consistency and predictability, and then you want to take it in the other direction. So there's no one size fits all answer. It really depends on your business strategy.
Well, and I think what I was going to say before is I think that comes down to the marketer's inherent understanding of their business and their customers. Like, they have to make an ultimate judgment call, and we've kind of seen this in our space. Like, you can send a message that gets you an amazing immediate conversion lift, right? I know off the top of my head the sorts of messages that you can send that will get you an amazing conversion lift. Does that then translate into brand affinity, lifetime value, like all of that stuff? Like, probably not. And it's kind of like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to optimize for today or optimize for the long term? Do you want that user to remain on your list for like a decent amount of time? And that's kind of where and why I think marketers want to be more personalized, because they want to say the right thing to their customers. But also, I think you said something before, which I think is absolutely accurate. Sometimes the marketer needs to make a judgment call, right? They need to make a judgment call. Like, maybe their judgment call is that it's not appropriate to personalize for this customer, right? It's not appropriate to send a personalized communication just because of what we know about them and who they are and where they're at and their buyer's journey with us. And I think that there's still an element in that in this whole process.
Then again, that's still a decision at the end of the day, right? It's still a decision to not personalize is a decision nonetheless. And so it's, I think that's the point about the data side of it too, is, you can't optimize what you don't collect. And I do think you're right about brand affinity and identity is a hard thing to measure, but I just think about if we could optimize to it, I think that would be fascinating. I wonder if there are measures of this that you could do some kind of long tail optimization towards, that you could quantify in some way over time. I think that would be fascinating. And you kind of have these almost micro optimizations that occur within their kind of local parameters, but then you've also got kind of these longer term optimizations that can occur, that kind of almost this layers of abstraction above, which I think is quite interesting.
That'd be a very, very tricky experiment to run, but if someone does it, that would be cool.
Yeah. I always think like one of the best examples of personalization I've seen is from one of our customers, and it was like completely manual. Like there was nothing automated about it. There was maybe a little bit of data integration in order for them to figure it out. But it was during COVID, and it was a bunch of customers that were having terrible issues with their deliveries. Like their products were delayed because of warehouse issues and all of this stuff. And so they just decided not to communicate their promotions to them whilst they resolved the issues with their deliveries. And I'm like, that's not like a classic personalization use case, but it is being it's being understanding to the customer's context and the situation that they're in, and using your marketer's prowess to better communicate to customers or not communicate it.
I'd also add on that, George, you mentioned about every marketer is trying to send the right message at the right time, and the right channel. Very few don't want to send the wrong message at the wrong time. And like thinking about like that thing that everyone said, you buy a product, right? And then an hour later you get an email that's 10% off the product you just bought at full price. There's an element of brand affinity as associated with like, that might have been the right message for me. I bought the product, but getting that discount 30 minutes after I spent full price is damaging, right, to that brand. You'll get kind of annoyed. And that's a data problem, that can be solved by just having that connection and understanding, okay, well, I made that purchase. Maybe I shouldn't receive that message. To your point, Jasper, not receiving a promotion when that company might not be able to serve that product to me. It's manifesting a bad experience. And I do think there's that element of send the right message at the right time, but that as part of that is not sending the wrong message at the wrong time as well. So I think that's interesting. So, George, one question I've got, which I think all of us in this space kind of struggle with, is this almost like cold start problem, right? It requires, there's a certain amount of, you mentioned about StatSig, you mentioned about, this being something that reinforcement learning requires ultimately all these signals to be able to make effective decisions. How do you think about acquiring enough data for it to make an intelligent decision? I imagine this doesn't apply to, a mom and pop shop selling, on the corner. There's not enough signal there. Or is there? Are there signals that ultimately brands can look at that provides a very high quality signal to what message someone should receive and when?
Pre-reinforcement learning, the way this kind of tension plays out is, if you want to do certain optimizations, you have to do manual A/B tests, and those A/B tests, the more you want to personalize, you're going to be dividing customers into segments. The smaller your segments, the longer and the more data you need, and the longer you have to run your tests to get to StatSig. And while you're running them, you're leaving value on the table, because you're not, it's a test. You're testing good things and bad things, and so you're not optimizing by definition when you're testing. You're just sending a bunch of random things that are suboptimal. And so there's a cost. There's an opportunity cost of experimentation. And the whole premise of reinforcement learning, there's a term used or a concept in reinforcement learning called the exploration-exploitation trade-off. The goal of a reinforcement learning model is to, in the long term, generate as much total reward as it can. What that means is, if it's actually too exploratory, let's say it already is 99% sure that this is the right thing to send, but it's not 100% sure, so it's going to flip a coin. That's not good. It's not gonna perform optimally. On the other hand, if it's not exploratory enough, that's called being kind of greedy. That's also suboptimal. If it thinks, oh, this is probably 51% the right thing to send, I'm always going to send that thing to this individual. Maybe you'd learn something if you mixed it up. And so the whole premise of reinforcement learning is these models are good if they're built to navigate that trade-off in an optimal way, right? Where they're being very efficient in how they explore, to where they're not leaving value on the table. So in a way, you can say that the entire field of reinforcement learning exists in order to provide a good solution to the cold start problem. It's still a problem. There's no perfect solution. You can't just magically wave a wand and it'll work right away. But you can kind of mitigate the cost of experimentation by having these models that are very good at learning in a maximally efficient way.
Looking ahead 5 years, how do you think, like what you guys are doing, what we're doing, how do you think it changes and reshapes the role of the marketer? What does it look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing this across pretty much almost all aspects of work and life, where things that can be delegated to the AI get delegated, and then those things that can't be delegated are now things we can focus more on. And I think for marketing, we talked about some things here that are important strategic questions that don't have cut and dried answers. And so to me, the marketer's role is going to become increasingly one of managing armies of agents provided by all sorts of specialist companies, including ours, right? So managing Jacquard agents that help them create libraries of content, or that author content that gets sent directly to individuals, managing Braze AI decisioning studio agents that do the experimentation and the personalization, run the reinforcement learning. And so now you're, as a marketer, you have this army of agents that you're having to tend to, take care of, optimize, tune, monitor. And then you're spending your time making these big strategic decisions, like when do you need a trade-off between a local optimization and a global optimization, like having a consistent brand identity, but then also having variety in how you message so that you can get maximum campaign performance. So that's at least for the looking ahead a few years, that's probably what it looks like. Looking ahead 10, 15 years, who knows? The world is changing so quickly and so unpredictably.
For the companies that are listening today, everyone's excited about AI. I think it's quite hard to fit. I personally feel this sometimes, and I've said this to our teams. I think half of the problem is thinking creatively about what to do with it. So for anyone out there who's kind of trying to figure out what the first practical step is that they should take when it comes to using AI specifically for the purpose of returning an ROI, what should they think about, and where should they start to think about that?
I would take it back to that kind of three bottlenecks. I'd say, okay, there's the content bottleneck, there's the experimentation bottleneck, there's the data bottleneck. And I'd sort of, I think a company should do a frank assessment of their stack. Where are they on each of those three? Which of those is the furthest behind the others? And then I'd go after that.
Simple, straightforward. I love it.
Great. Thank you, George. Really appreciate having you on.
Thanks, Toby and Jasper. Great chatting with you all, and excited to be partnering with you, and appreciate you all having me on your show.